This video is meant to discuss understanding the basics of becoming a PPP loan fraud whistleblower. To start off with, what is the PPP loan program? The Payroll Protection Program was done by Congress in businesses' time of need during the pandemic when there were shutdowns and other things that had adversely affected businesses. Congress thought it'd be a good idea to allow billions upon billions of dollars to be offered as loans to businesses in order to keep individuals employed. That's one of the cardinal principles of the program. The money is ultimately supposed to flow to the employees. PPP loan fraud is when businesses falsely certified that they were eligible to receive the loan and or falsely use the fund. Let me break down a couple ways that can occur. The first is ineligibility. And I think this is one of the most important ones to look for if you're thinking about blowing the whistle about PPP loan fraud. Ineligible companies are those that had technically exceeded the payroll caps of $10 million but received a loan, or exceeded the employee count of 500 for the first draw for the loan or 300 for the second draw of the loan. They could do it in a couple manners, just outright falsifying their census and or payroll. Or second, they could have hidden interrelated companies. And that's a big one. That's where insiders are going to be highly influential in trying to unearth some of this PPP loan fraud. Another way of ineligibility are businesses that were just outright ineligible, designated by Congress that they should not have received loans, and they falsify their NAICS codes. For example, casinos or other industries, and then they falsely state a different NAICS code that they normally use in order to obtain the loans. A lot of people come to our firm and think the business didn't need it, and that would make them ineligible. That does not render the business ineligible, per se. Basically, the certification at the time to the federal government had to do with the forecast was too economically uncertain to understand whether or not you needed the loan or not. And candidly, with the government haphazardly shutting down businesses, it was quizzical who would stay in business and for what length of time. So if that's the only violation that you think that the business didn't need the money, but the business ultimately flowed the funds to the employees, then that's not a case that our firm takes, and that's not a case that, in my legal opinion, I think is actionable, and I don't think the government's going to take that. Other things that defendants do, when I say defendants, companies that have wrongfully exploited the PPP loan program, are they falsify or inflate their payroll so they achieved or obtained more funds than they normally would have been entitled to. They could double or triple count employees. Sometimes this scam is done by employees purposed to different companies. They may even triple count these individuals. There's other ways that they may falsify to inflate payroll costs, and it may just involve outright fabrication. And that dovetails into the other leg of individuals who I just dub outright criminals in this scheme, defrauding the taxpayers and the government. Businesses that just didn't exist. Individuals that falsely certified and indicated that they had a business when in fact they didn't. They obtained a loan. Problem with those cases from a whistleblower perspective is that these are just outright criminals. The money's probably gone. It's hard to collect when you bring a civil lawsuit against these individuals under the False Claims Act, which we'll talk about in a second. However, I expect a lot of these cases to go criminal like some have already gone. If somebody just outright fabricated a business, obtained a loan, and didn't have that business, the federal government has every interest in using its full weight in order to punish those individuals because they just outright defrauded the taxpayers out of funds. From a whistleblower perspective, people come to us and say, what constitutes becoming a PPP loan fraud whistleblower? Well, there's two different categories I put it in. Number one, insiders who have information about some of the topics I had just discussed. Only with the use of some of these insiders will the government be able to unearth the fact that there were some of these interrelated companies, most likely, or that they did falsify payroll, or they did lay off the staff and falsely state that the people stayed employed. That's another category of actionable conduct under the PPP loan fraud statute, which is litigated under the False Claims Act. The False Claims Act allows a private citizen to bring in action on behalf of the government as a relator, and if the government recovers those funds, the individual could obtain up to 30% of what the government recovers. So it's a very effective statute. Each year, billions are recovered under it. Each year, hundreds of millions go to whistleblowers who do the right thing. So if you know of PPP loan fraud, you probably should have a free confidential consultation to discuss it. Talked about insiders blowing the whistle, which is what contemplated under a whistleblowing statute like the False Claims Act. The second category are outsiders. Outsiders are able to compile data from various sources and understand that what was submitted to the federal government, and that's public record record. I think ProPublica and other websites have the information about what has been submitted to the federal government on behalf of different companies, and they look at what the businesses from an outside perspective had submitted to the federal government, find other information, and recognize that that information is just false based upon other public records or other records that they may have access to or other investigative steps that they take. Now, I suspect to some extent the federal government will award certain whistleblowers with whistleblower rewards for taking an outsider route, but I think that route's very narrow depending upon what information and added benefit this outsider brings to the table. Shifting back gears to the insiders, a lot of common questions we get is, if I blow the whistle on this, should I be afraid of retaliation? Well, particularly if you're an insider, there's always a risk of retaliation. Our firm has dealt with this. If you look at our firm, Brown LLC, we are one of the most prolific litigators in the False Claims Act space. We've dealt with all sorts of permutations of retaliation, some in which never manifest and just are concerns about people thinking about when they want to blow the whistle, and some have manifested. The statutes are quite assertive, meant to combat the fact that anybody who blows the whistle or uses and invokes properly the False Claims Act is entitled to double damages, attorney fees, reinstatement, back pay, things along those lines. So there's quite strident type of protections. We can go over, as a law firm, a whistleblower law firm, your options if you are thinking about blowing the whistle. And the last question, how do you report PPP loan fraud? Well, you need to report it properly by invoking the False Claims Act. It does require the use of a False Claims Act lawyer or law firm if you want to obtain a portion of the recovery if the government is successful. If not, you can certainly just report it to the federal government. But years down the line, when you see that if there is a recovery, don't expect to receive any portion. So thank you for listening to this video. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below. Happy to answer them, or call our firm 877-561-0000. Thank you.